Hey, it's David with No Chaser, and today's topic is something I actually wanted to talk about for a long time. It's something I would call a quietly controversial topic. Now, it's something that's not, I would say, very controversial in the recovery community, if you've been in there for just even a small amount of time, but to the greater world and the general population, I would say it is quietly controversial. And that is the idea that addiction and alcoholism is a disease. Not just an affliction, not just even a mental illness or a disorder, but a disease. Now, here's the thing. I try to be empathetic towards people that have to deal with alcoholics and addicts, even if they are them themselves. I mean, the thing I understand is I believe that addiction is not a moral failing, but I understand that it has consequences that affects people. I know this is something that a lot of people don't want to hear, and it's usually something you don't want to dwell on because it leads to, shame and guilt that may be hampering, your recovery, and it just sometimes just pointless to even have the shame. I've covered that in other videos before. But the thing is that, I've always said it this way, people liken the recovery and taking care of, the illness of addiction the same way that you take care of diabetes. And some would argue, well, diabetes doesn't make you break into cars and steal money from your family. And I get that. I understand that. Again, I try to empathize with people. Now, I have said this sentiment before, and I know some people don't like it because it seems to maybe go along with the stigma. I'm not saying it's not a disease, but I'm just saying I understand that people who have not been addicts or alcoholics may look at this, especially if they have people that have or are currently suffering from terminal illnesses. They may be seeing people that are getting drunk and getting high, saying they have a disease, and then they see their loved one in the hospital suffering from cancer and may be offended that those are being compared. And I think that's one, just a wrong way to go about it, because people always seem to, they always seem to jump to cancer whenever this topic is brought up. It's just like, well, you could just put down the drink or put down the needle. They can't just stop having cancer. It's just like, okay, the disease is not just cancer. Disease is a whole bunch of other things. And, in one of the more well-known sort of ways this is, because it's understandable as like a disorder. I think a lot of people can get on, like, again, when I say people, and for this topic, I'm talking about how other people that aren't alcoholics and addicts can grasp this idea. And I think a lot of them could get on board with the idea that it's a disorder, but that real sense of it being a disease, like a physical sort of illness, may be harder for some people. Alcoholics Anonymous and, that big 12-step recovery, what they do is they liken it sort of as the obsession of the mind, but the allergy of the body. There's something inside of us and they don't even go that deep into it. They don't talk about like brain chemicals or chemistry of any sort physiologically. They just say, there's an allergy that once a person drinks, they cannot stop. They have the phenomenon of craving, which again still sort of seems like a mental part of it. I was a person for a very long time that was like, what, I agree it's a disorder. I don't know if I can get on board with this whole like disease thing. In fact, I still to this day, I don't really use the terminology that I say out loud I suffer from a disease. I don't really know why. This is not something I'm totally against. I think it's just part of my mind where I don't know. I really don't know why. That's something I'm still like figuring out why I'm so reticent to doing that. But I know a lot of people, they say it openly. They say I suffer from a disease that I need to treat. It's chronic and it will be terminal and it's progressive and all that sort of jazz, and it all makes sense. I mean, the thing is that addiction, it's hard to just like, I think another thing that makes it hard is to quantify it as a disease, because addiction is so complex. Like, one thing you can say is that it is an equal opportunity offender. It all sorts of demographics and people suffer from it. Some people suffer more but it will affect anybody, and it can affect, like, well, not everybody, but it can affect any type of person, all over the world. And all the symptoms are very similar. All the same sort of outcomes of the disease or illness, if you will, are all incredibly similar. It all seems to line up, but the thing is, addiction is so complex and it has so many factors. That's what I mean about, like, as far as, like, what you say a disease or illness goes, it's usually kind of like a very, like, solidified one track to how you catch it, or how it is created in your body, or how it infects you, or what have you. But there's so many factors that go into addiction. You talk about environmental ones, you talk about mental ones, you talk about emotional ones. Like, so many, if you're in the recovery community, you talk to a lot of people that have begun their journey or are trying to. They talk about all the reasons that they started using drugs or started drinking. It could be for trauma, and it seems like some people have a higher predisposition, but not just even a higher predisposition like genetically, but I mean, it's no surprise that a lot of people from poor and downtrodden communities have more people that are addicts and alcoholics. That can happen in rich communities, but by far it happens more in poor ones. And so it would be like, what type of disease, it just, like, affects poor people more? But you could say a lot, actually. There's, if you go through so many sociological factors of how people, get illnesses. The poor community, it just, that happens a lot to them too. Again, this is all very complex stuff that doesn't really have one exact answer. And I look at this type of stuff, and you can definitely say that there is genetics involved. I've always said too is that, like, people sometimes, like, alcoholism gets passed down like the family name. And sometimes you could say there's genetics a part of it. And another thing you could say is that it is just incredibly stressful, and it affects you as you're growing up mentally and emotionally, just growing up in an alcoholic home. You could be predisposed to that just from growing up in a home like that. Or it could be genetics. Again, who knows? I don't think, maybe people would be more satisfied if they could actually point out a certain molecule or chemical in the brain and go, oh, yep, here it is. Here's the drinking vodka every day little molecule that is passed down and is now in your genes. But it doesn't work like that. Now, I think this is just something that's, casually interesting to talk about. The real discussion, though, is, I think, just the considering of it being disease, like how people react to that. And it goes to my original point about how, a lot of people even struggle with the idea of it being a moral failing still. Some people have the idea that, man, you just gotta will yourself to stop doing this shit. Some people even say you gotta will yourself to even moderate. Like, you still should drink, just don't be a jackass about it. Heard that a lot, which is very strange. There's even, so I love the show South Park, and South Park does an episode about AA and the idea of it being a disease. And most of it is stuff that I actually, like, disagree with. Still a very funny episode. And again, I'm able to laugh at myself. And if you feel you are too, if you're an addict or alcoholic, I would say watch the episode. It's very funny. Very offensive too, but it's South Park. But anyways, so the idea of it being considered disease, there's still that stigma with it. And that may seem unfair, and a lot of times it is. But again, I come with this sense of empathy and understanding, because with a lot of people, if they're suffering from some sort of illness, there are not the things that are done that people that are alcoholics and addicts do. All the hurt we cause, and sort of the disorder created selfishness. Like, I don't want to say pure selfishness. Again, you see people that when they are in recovery, they aren't that, like, morbidly selfish anymore. They're not self-absorbed, which shows something. It shows, it. And if you talk to those people when they've changed, and if you ask them, oh, you finally used your willpower and you just stopped acting like a jackass, they'll be like, no, it wasn't that. There was other things I did and had to do, and there was something that, eventually I had changed in my mind. So they won't agree to that version either. It's just that disease is such it's such a loaded word, because the thing that people with diseases and illnesses obviously get the sympathy that they deserve. But people with alcoholism addiction, they'll get sympathy from some people and people that understand, but even people that understand at a certain point, it is very stressful to live or to deal with alcoholics and addicts. Like, even me, as somebody who works case management and child welfare, I would deal with the parents a lot, who 95% of the time their issues were directly related to substance abuse disorder of some kind, or drinking or something that would cause things that they did, or just kind of negligence that would almost lead to getting their children taken away. And even though I totally sympathized with them being addicts or alcoholics, even they stressed me out or annoyed me, or I had judgments against them. So I mean, I think it's very hard for, again, this is mainly like a conversation about the general population. It's hard for them to take that leap into really grasping and acknowledging it as the model of a disease. And I mentioned earlier that I've struggled with like fully saying, yes, I suffer from a disease. Even like saying that phrase like to normal people would be difficult for me, because whenever I have these reservations that I feel that it's not, again, something it's not something that I disagree with. It's just something that I think people would take poorly. And so, I should probably have more background than that and not care. But again, it's a little bit murky. Like, it's something that I'm on board with, but I don't like fully agree with, in this way that it's an illness of sort, but it's just not quite the same. And I wouldn't even say that just because of like any sort of stigma, but it's not quite the same just because of how it manifests and then how it's shown. Like, all addicts and alcoholics have similar symptoms and do similar things, but even they're not on the same scale. They and a lot of illnesses will follow suit if untreated, but I've come across many people that drank their whole lives and were functional, and some people like me who were like that for some years and then totally not, after just a couple of years. And then you have some people that are anomalies that are able to, kind of basically have a bad period of their life and then just drop it. They are like, almost, you would say, exceptions to the rules, but they do exist. And it's just, it varies so wildly that I think it leaves enough room for people to, dismiss a lot of things. And I think it's, it could be an interesting conversation for neuroscientists or people casually interested into the phenomenon of addiction. It could be interesting to look at all the different factors and consider it a disease. But I think the more interesting and rather more important conversation is talking about why people are reluctant to acknowledge it as a disease. Why people, why the general population, they will just either struggle or just steadfastly be like, no, it is not a disease. Again, cancer is a disease. Emphysema is a disease. Even that one can come with stigma if you're smoking. And I think that's actually a good sort of example of it, is that sort of people that if they get emphysema for smoking may have less sympathy than someone who just got lung cancer from just genetics or just whatever happened. They just get lung cancer for whatever reason. And that idea of sympathy publicly is, again, it leads to this whole sort of conversation about why there is stigma around alcoholism and addiction. And again, as a person, I'll be totally candid. Stigma is it holds people back from getting better. But again, as being empathetic, I understand part of it because of the destruction and damage that alcoholics and addicts can do to their families, to their loved ones, and to society. And again, it's that weird gray area where it's one of those things where, it's not their fault. It's not your fault you're an addict or an alcoholic. It's not my fault that this is the way I am. But the consequences are also real in the real world. And so it takes a lot of forgiveness and self-forgiveness that I think most people aren't ready for. Me, myself, still included in that. And I think that is one of the biggest factors in this sort of conversation about it being a disease. Anyways, that's my little 2 cents on that. I hope everybody out there is having a great day and or night. I love the comments that I'm getting and the feedback from people. I try to engage with them as much as I can. And so if you're struggling out there, just know that other people, they are, and you are truly not alone. If you're watching this again, as I mentioned before, with a casual interest, thank you for watching. And if you're in recovery and things are going well, keep it up. Other than that, be well.